So ir Curviniad Heno. How did that go?
Very well.
I only practiced it 250 times. And the other thing is, I'm glad I didn't leave the microphone on when I was in the loo. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. Now, I have so much to say about this man, I had to write it down, so you'll have to forgive me for reading it. But let me introduce you to one of Wales' most unexpected cultural voices, Rhys Mwyn. A punk with a trowel, a rebel with a cause, a guide to the living past.
Well done.
Not that we have high expectations or anything. In the 1980s, Rhys wasn't digging up Roman roads. He was fronting a raw, rebellious Welsh language punk band called Anrefon. Ignored by the mainstream, he created his own record label of the same name and caught the attention of none other than John Peel, a man who, of course, has many years of childhood associations or had with our village. John brought Rhys and his band to BBC Radio 1 and even came to watch them play live in Wales. But Rhys didn't stop there. He swapped guitar strings for ancient stones, became an archaeologist, educator, and one of the most engaging cultural storytellers in Wales. These days you'll find him leading walking tours through Carnarvon and Gwynedd, revealing forgotten or hidden stories etched into the landscape. His book, which arrived this afternoon by Amazon, but he has some at much better value for sale here tonight. Real Gwynedd is part history, part psychogeography, linking prehistoric monuments with punk gigs and drawing out the radical soul of the land. What distinguishes Rhys isn't just what he knows, it's how he tells it. He doesn't just teach history, he performs it. He lives it. Rhys shows us that heritage isn't just what's left behind, it's what still pulses under our feet. Ladies and gentlemen, Rhys is going to share with us his thoughts about the archaeology of Anglesey and what old books can reveal to us. So please put your hands together to give the warmest of Syncross Niagara welcomes to Rhys Mwyn.
That was quite a good introduction. I'm sitting here rather smug. I would have said, rebels without applause. That was our experience. Okay. Slightly different this evening. I've always felt when I lecture that I should be standing up, because if I sit down, it just feels like I'm not doing my work. And I'm quite animated. But because the whole thing is being filmed, you can't see this, but I've actually been tied to the chair. I can't really breathe, but I'm not going anywhere. So I'm being forced to sit. Thank you for the invitation. Interesting, because a lot of the places we go in Wales, village halls, church halls, vestry capel, if you know what a vestry capel is, and you're lucky in some of these places. If there's 15 people, it's looking good. If it's 20, we've got to get some more chairs. And it's nice when you see a sense of community still existing. You do see it in places. Llŷn, the peninsula, is a good example. If I lecture in Llŷn on that peninsula, they come out. They're not at home watching EastEnders, and it's always a pleasure to see people just come out and socialise, and people are keen to learn. So what I thought this evening, as we're on this morn, is how can old books help inform us? So normally, if we were looking at books, we'd say, interesting, good read, looking at the pictures, whatever you do with books. I just pile them up from floor to ceiling and have too many of them. But what can we actually learn is the question. And over the next, certainly within the next 20 to 30 minutes, I hope we can nail it. I can show you the value in old books, how it works. And then I will certainly make you think. One of the key things with archaeology is there are more questions than answers. And there's a couple of people here tonight who are colleagues in the tour guiding business. We only meet each other briefly in coffee shops because we're all on different coaches going to different castles. So, how well we know each other is a good question. It's very brief encounters in a coffee shop. How's your tour going? Great. But one of the things, if any of you have been with me on walks, I will always say, good question, good question. And that means two things. It is a good question. You've asked something that's worth asking. You've nailed it. You've realized what the questions are. But also when you say good question, of course, we don't know the answer. Good question. This is what we'd like to know. We don't actually know. So let's take you to this first slide. It's a book published in 1900 by John E. Griffith, and it's called The Cromlechs of Anglesey and Carnarvonshire. Now, it's a portfolio of photographs, and I'll show you some of the photographs as we go. But they're taken close to 1900. If the book is published in 1900, those photographs are taken within, I don't know how much earlier you'd go. Not more than a couple of years, surely, before publishing a book. So what this gives us, it's a book that's... now then, I'm just trying to look for a reference point. It's this size. It's like a... laptop. Size of a laptop. It's not a ordinary little book. It's a portfolio with photographs. If you ever see it, buy it immediately. They're worth, I suppose you could say they're worth money, but they're worth much more in culture value. I've got 2 copies. And the way I got the last copy was to go to a book fair, wait till the bookstallers are packing up because no one has bought the book. And they wanted 120, and they were packing the box, and I said 90. And I'll take it now. And of course, as they're trying to get stuff in the car, I think I probably paid 100, saved 20 quid. But it's worth it. This is why. Now, the first slide is probably not the best one in terms of what I'm going to say, but these are the 3 standing stones at Llanfechell, north coast of Anglesey. The reason I say this is not the best photograph to start with is those 3 stones have not changed in the last 125 years. They look exactly the same. They're in the same place, they're undamaged, and they're in a field. So actually that photograph doesn't really reveal anything that you wouldn't see today. But they are exceptional. On Anglesey, in Wales, 3 stones grouped together are highly unusual. They're what we call standing stones, which belong to the Bronze Age, somewhere between 2000 BC and about 700 BC. The Bronze Age, or 2000 BC, is Stonehenge. It's that period. The major change in that period is we start to use metal tools, bronze. So bronze, as you well know, is a mixture of tin and copper. First part is easy. We just go to Mynydd Paris in Amlwch, and we've got copper. We're trying to make bronze axes. Where does the tin come from? You know, Cornwall. So here's the first good question, isn't it? How do the lines of communication exist at that time to bring 1 part tin, 9 parts copper together to make bronze, and the sources are either Mynydd Paris or Great Orme, Pen-y-Gogarth, Llandudno of course, and Cornwall. That's quite remarkable. So you're looking at people who are highly skilled, highly organized in communication, developing trade routes. So the Bronze Age is known because we start to use metal. That's the first thing. The metal comes from Europe. Dare I tell a terrible joke? This is before Brexit, otherwise we would have never had metal. It's when we were trading freely. So we learn from our brothers and sisters. Their borders would not have been policed in the same way. We wouldn't be here without them. There's a great quote by Dr. Rhys Mwyn, who's the director of the National Museum of Wales. He published a book on the objects in the National Museum of Wales. It's a good book. And he looks at individual objects. And in his foreword, he's Dr. Rhys Mwyn. He says, there are no incomers in Wales. There are no natives in Wales. In this sense, we've all arrived here after the Ice Age. So there was no one here 12,000 years ago. We were covered in ice. And Irwin's point, Dr. Rhys Mwyn, his point is, none of us can make claim to anything. We've all moved, and that's how we've developed. So this is how we get metal today. It's because we moved as people, shared, communicated. So at this time we've got Stonehenge. We've got these people who are developing metal, building monuments on the landscape. We call them monuments because they're way bigger and way beyond what you actually need. So they're making a statement on the landscape by building these things. Stonehenge is, I was going to say the big one. So's Avebury. So is all the stuff up in Orkney. So for some reason, we're building monuments on the landscape. And this one at Llanfechell, so let's have a look at Llanfechell today. That's a monument, north coast of Anglesey, built by these early metal users. They're all farming. Typically Anglesey, it's good farmland, isn't it? So since the Neolithic, since 4000 BC, we've been farming this land. Okay, when I look at the stones at Llanfechell, I see 3 elderly gentlemen. They've drunk a bit too much, and they're sort of leaning in, having a conversation. Certainly the chap on the right, he's definitely leaning. We have no idea what these were for or what they mean. So as a general rule, standing stones are not burial places. Stonehenge is associated with burial, but to the best of our knowledge, most of these stones in Anglesey are not burial markers. So are they meeting places? Sometimes in Snowdonia, you'll see them in passes, and they look like way markers. You know, here's our old roots, that makes sense. But the 3 in Llanfechell, there's a pair, isn't there, in Penrhos Feilw near Holyhead. What's the purpose? Penrhos Feilw, you always think they're like a portal to the other world. So that's quite exceptional, Llanfechell. They're quite special, and we don't understand what they mean. Anyone who claims, you know, if you watch whatever you watch, Disney Channel or something, and they make these claims, approach with care, because we don't know. And the other danger is imposing what we think today on folk 4,000 or 3,000, whatever it is, years ago. I might come to Brinkelly. I'll keep on to that story, I think. So that appears in the Cromlech's portfolio. Now, there's another book by Will Ifan o Vaughan. I wish we could have met Will Ifan and brought him along with us tonight, because Will writes this book, The Meini Hirion and Sarns of Anglesey. Now, a sarn in Welsh would normally refer to something like a trackway or a road. The Roman road from North Wales to South Wales is called Sarn Helen, after Helen or Ellen, who is the lady who appears in Maxine Reddick's Dream. It was never called Sarn Helen, but that's what we say today. So Sarn usually is a Roman road. So Will has written this book. That's just the inner page. Again, these have been reprinted by Bob Magma. You can pick them up in Oriel Môn. But this is what Will does. This is the brilliant bit. And we're going back to the early 20th century here. You look very carefully at Anglesey, and he's gridded the island. Please don't shout out ley lines. I'm going to come on to ley lines. Please don't shout out ley lines. But Will has gridded Anglesey, and he's looking at some pattern, the equivalent of what we do as ley lines. And having thought long and hard about this, not very hard, you realise, if you're familiar with Corsthega, it's that ancient fault line that we cross. The Menai Strait, they're all parallel because they're ancient fault lines. So what Will has recognised in the archaeological record is how they were confined to certain spaces on Anglesey, because Corsthega would have been tidal before the dike at Matraeth. So we don't find much archaeology there because you'd have been splish-sploshing around trying to erect a standing stone in a marsh. Not the best idea. So for all, bless him as we say, but you look at people like Will Ivan of Vaughan, early 20th century, they were touched by that initial thing of spirituality and interest in druids, which has flourished today. If you ever go to Bryn Celli and summer solstice, there's about 500 modern day druids turning up. So things evolve, interestingly. And there's another book, and then I'll come back to some pictures. The key one, I think, for us as archaeologists is Mona Antiqua Restaurata. This is published in 1723. Never mind 1900. 1723 by Henry Rowlands, who's the rector of Llan-Udan, near Plasnewydd. So Rowlands is probably the first, I suspect he is, to do an archaeological survey of the monuments on Anglesey in 1723. So the obvious thing with Rowlands' book, Mona Antiqua Restaurata, is there's a record of what was there in the 18th century. Half of them have gone. For field walls and lintels in barns, I'm not going to blame the farmers, but the farmers have just ripped them all up for buildings. This is what happened in the 1800s. We've lost a lot of monuments. So Rowlands, our portfolio, they all give us an insight which we cannot have today. Can't see these things today. He also does this, and this is key. It's not the first, but it's amongst the first ever image of a druid. We like this druid. He's got his beard, got his stick, looks the part, proper druid. What's interesting, if you ever get a chance, there's an art historian called Peter Lord. He is the Welsh art historian expert. And Lord has a lecture on the image of the druid in art. And I went to one of his lectures, and he reaffirmed what I'd spotted. It was good. Everybody copies this image that Rowlands put out first, and I'll show you in a second. What I've never been able to figure, and I don't know whether Peter Lord would know, but on this image that you're looking at now, at the bottom it says, "from a statue." And I don't know what that statue is. So Henry Rowlands and whoever's doing the drawings for him has obviously sourced that or copied that. But that's your first Anglesey druid. Now then, this is published in 1772? 3? I can't read. 1773. So we're going from 1723 to 1773. Call it plus or minus 50 years. All of a sudden, Stonehenge has popped behind the druid. It's the same druid, same beard, just 50 years older. We come on to, what's this one? 18 something, and he's now got gold around his neck. Still the same druid. He was good genes. He lived a long time. Even on that level, and I've only taken 3 random paintings, it's the same guy in every one. He keeps popping up. In other words, they're all copying each other with gaps of 50 years. So our image of a druid might well be down to Henry Rowland's from Llaniddan on Ynys Môn, that everybody else has copied. And then let's end with this one, who is, well, this is the archdruid that was, his name was William Morris. Not to be confused by William Morris Wallpaper and Arts and Crafts. It's not the same William Morris. This is a William Morris from Carnarvon, who was archdruid. He's let us down slightly. He's not grown his beard. But again, this is what you, if you went to the National Eisteddfod in Rhyl this year in August, if anybody went, that's what you see. So these people take it deeply serious. This is the gorsedd of the bards, national event. And I sit there going, this is all due to Henry Rowlands from Llaniddan, and there's no idea how accurate Rowlands was. They've just adopted the whole thing. There's a very, very famous Welsh poet called Cynan from Pwllheli. And Cynan in the early 20th century streamlined the whole Eisteddfod ritual. So he formalized it. And he was mixing his ideas with ideas of people like Iolo Morgannwg. So everything that we see today in the Eisteddfod is totally made up. I'll never work again. This cannot go out on YouTube. It's interesting. I mean, I'm not being judgmental. I couldn't care less about the druids in the Eisteddfod any more than I can care less about the ones in Bryn Celli. They can do what they like. But as an archaeologist, it's completely, historically, inaccurate. It's made up. And that's fine. Nothing wrong with making it up. But it's not fact. So Bryn Celli, if you're familiar with a burial chamber, you can agree and disagree, mind you, here. This is my take on looking at the evidence. I always say that our job is to be Sherlock Holmes. It's not to be having a particular opinion. It's certainly not to have an agenda trying to prove your agenda. It's follow the evidence. So when we excavate as archaeologists, we look for something that gives us a clue that allows us to tell the story. Very, very dangerous when archaeologists try to find things to prove their theory. Because you're then tempted to go, actually the red glasses were this side, not that side. You know, I had an interesting experience a few years ago where I was asked to do a guided tour for North Wales Police. And they were all in Nancythain learning Welsh. Good on them. And I was discussing following the evidence, and I couldn't resist. I said, you know this as police officers. If you do not follow the evidence, you're stitching somebody up. They did laugh. But it's true, isn't it? If you start bending the evidence, it's dangerous. So my approach is always, I don't care. I literally don't care. I follow the evidence, and whatever that tells us, we have to live with that for the time being. And then next week, somebody's going to come along and probably prove it wrong, and you go with it. But when I say I don't care, it sounds flippant, but it means I don't care if we find a Roman fort here or don't find a Roman fort here. What I care about is whatever we find here, we interpret it accurately and correctly, and the information given is, this is what we think we've got. Making it up doesn't benefit anybody. So Bryn Celli, this is our first image of Bryn Celli in 1723. We've got two piles of stones and a stone or two in the middle. How does this relate to the monument we see today? And this is not an accurate picture. It's a representation, isn't it, in ink in 1723. And I think what Rowlands is showing here is the chamber on the right as you look, the passageway on the left as you look, the inner stone, the column inside the chamber, which is the one in the middle, and the pattern stone, which is the central stone on the outside. I think that's what he's showing. So I could take you there today and show you all those 4 things, but it doesn't look like that. So I think what we have here in 1723 is the pattern stone, which is the carved stone in the middle of the monument in Bryn Celli Ddu, which was most likely the centre of the whole monument. The big pile of stones is the actual chamber. The low pile of stones will be your passageway in, and then it's the column inside, the pillar stone, inside the monument that's been shown. So that's really interesting. Am I right? Good question. Not necessarily. If I'm right, that's what we have in 1723, which is what we have today. Let's skip that. Let's go to this one. That's it in 1847. So what we have is that big pile of stones and the little pile of stones next to the gentleman. So I'm going to go back quickly to that and go back to that. Question, am I right? I'm not always right. Could it be that that's what's being represented? Because you've got the big pile of stones and that lower pile of stones. So that's 1847. And we come back 1900. We're back to the portfolio now, the original books that we looked at. So we know from 1900 that the actual cromlech, the stone, the burial chamber is there. There's no mound really to talk of over it. And we also know there's a tree growing in the middle of it, which I think is in the previous one. Yeah, that tree's grown. So what are we learning here is there's a record from 1723, 1847, 1900 of Bryn Celli Ddu in existence, and probably hasn't changed that much except the fact that it's been completely reconstructed. But the elements are the same. So that's what it looks like today. And what I've called the pattern stone is the standing stone just outside the back of the burial chamber. So we think with the pattern stone, I've got the pattern on me. If anybody's interested afterwards, you can ask. I've got a little image of the pattern. We think that that was placed in the centre of the whole monument. Think Stonehenge, but we're not looking at standing stones in the same scale. But right in the middle, you have this stone that's been carved. It's abstract art. That stone then is placed on top of burials, child burials, and that stone is then placed flat on the burials and buried underneath the mound of the whole monument. This is all part of the big project that they're constructing. The mound we see today is about a quarter of the size of what it should have been. The pattern stone today, which is a concrete cast, is just left upright so that we can look at it. It was originally buried underneath the mound. So here's the next good question. They carve this stone, it probably influences and inspires the building, but it's buried, never to be seen again. So they know they've done it. We know it's there because my grandmother has just told me, but we're never seeing it again. That's the ritual, isn't it? What's going on? Why are they doing this? Interesting at Bryn Celli Ddu, that whole landscape, Bryn Celli Ddu, is on a little ridge. Afon Braint runs to the south of it, and there's what we call a paleo channel to the north of it, which is an old riverbed. So when Bryn Celli Ddu was built about 3100 BC, so this is the Neolithic period, way before metal stone tools, Bryn Celli Ddu, it's a little bit, pardon this now, it's a bit like having the Isle of Avalon, after everything I've said about Druids. It's a magical landscape surrounded by water that they're building these monuments on, if we can imagine it. Having worked at Bryn Celli as an archaeologist with Cadw, we have discovered at least 3 Bronze Age burials on the same ridge. So at Bryn Celli Ddu, on that little ridge above Afon Braint, we have Neolithic monuments and Bronze Age monuments, 1,500 years apart. using the same landscape. That's quite remarkable, isn't it? How do they transfer this knowledge? How does a tradition last for over 1,000 years? I often wonder about this. How much do we do today that's based on something that was done 1,000 years ago? We can think about that afterwards. So Bryn Celli Ddu as a landscape is exceptional. It does compare to Stonehenge, which is a landscape. It does compare to Orkneys. The fact that it's on Ynys Môn, it hasn't had, Channel 4 and The Guardian popping up. But it's worthy. It's really interesting. On the whole landscape around Llandaniel, the village to the north of Bryn Celli, we have rock art on some of the bedrock. So they've been carving things on bedrock at the same time as the burial chamber. We call them rock art. Most of them are what we call cup marks, which they look like half a table tennis ball on rock surfaces, but they've been pecked with stone. The scale of it is almost mind-blowing. And Bryn Celli Ddu, we're back to, I do apologise about this, movement of people. Bryn Celli Ddu is in the same tradition as the burial chambers of Brwn y Boen in Ireland. Newgrange being the most famous, Nawth Dawth being well known. So if we go to Brwn y Boen, the Boyne Valley, those tombs are somewhere in the region of 300 to 500 years earlier than ours at Anglesey. So one of my terrible jokes is they're all called passage tombs. There's like a passageway, a little tunnel going in. And my joke is we cannot claim to have invented these things on Anglesey because they're earlier on Ireland. It's thanks to the Irish. I had an Irish gentleman with me on one of the tours last week, and I said, it's down to your forefathers that we have these passage tombs. The artwork at Barclodiad y Gawres, which is just round the corner, which is another passage tomb, are identical to what we see at Newgrange. Identical. When you stand at Barclodiad and look west, it's probably the nearest point, I guess, to your home in Ireland 5,000 years ago. So why did they build their little chamber on that headland, Portray Castell, on the headland facing Ireland? So maybe they just wanted to be buried close to home or looking back at home, which is what we do. But they're in the Irish tradition of tomb building. It's probably the west coast. Think of the western seaboard. The Irish Sea is our motorway at that time. There's probably more cultural links with Iberia, Western France, Cornwall, Isle of Man, Ireland, Northwest Scotland, than there would have been with the east coast of the British Isles. And that's not political. It's not Wales and England. It's just the way that the sea influenced things back in the day. So finally on Bryn Celli, the passageway faces east. And on the summer solstice, 21st of June, longest day, which would have been important to the farmers, this is nothing to do with druids or hippies. Definitely not. This is just farmers knowing their seasons. It's the agricultural calendar. Every summer solstice, clouds permitting, the sun shines into that tomb, down the passageway. Now the passageway was blocked, but they left a little window for the sun to come in. So once again, this is where it gets mind-blowing. They're burying the dead in the Neolithic period. It's communal burial. So if you had you've got one here in Barclodiad. Many of you, if you were living 3,000 BC, you might well have ended up in Barclodiad for a time. I suspect the likes of myself would have been thrown in the sea without too much ceremony. I suspect. There aren't enough burial chambers for everyone. So it's the important folk that get in. Nothing changes. It's like having railings in a cemetery, isn't it? And then somebody has a wooden cross. So, I'm not going to dwell too long because the map is hard to see. All I wanted to make the point there is Bryn Celli Ddu is not one monument, it's a landscape of monuments from different periods that are in some ways related to each other. Good question. Now, traditionally, with Bryn Celli Ddu, the traditional interpretation was that they built a henge, a circle first, and then inserted the burial chamber. Possible. But Steve Burrow from the National Museum of Wales has looked at the stone arrangement in the whole monument, and a lot of the stones are all lined up with the solstice. To me, that suggests it's one project because they've lined all the stones up. Don't believe me, don't trust me, but that's my gut instinct. And Burrow from National Museum of Wales has come to the same sort of conclusion. If everything is arranged in an orderly fashion, it looks like it's one mapping exercise. Who knows? This is the pattern stone with these carvings on them. If anybody's really interested, I've got one in my wallet. So the interpretation with this is that it was placed in the center of the monument. We don't know what the patterns mean, but let's say that the patterns inspired the building in some way. That's your starting point. That's your spirituality bit to get this thing built. But it's then buried underneath the monument. So we're just doing different things, aren't we? If you went to a Unitarian church and went to a Catholic church and you try to figure out why the Unitarians are different to the Catholics, we know today, but if you were an archaeologist, why have all these people got all these goods? Why have all these people got no goods at all? They must be poor. And we'd be very wrong, wouldn't we, with Unitarians and Catholics? Very wrong. So, you know, it's a challenge. I'm going to skip. I think, how far have I got? Let's go to this one, because I've got notes in Welsh when I was doing a class with this. So this is where Burrow has ended up with the alignment of the stones. So this is recent. This is 2010, Burrow does this work. National Museum of Wales. It's interesting because a lot of what we do as archaeologists, it comes from experience, obviously. You learn, don't you? You use your experience. And there's also this thing that you call your gut instinct. How do we trust our gut instinct? It's a blessing and a curse. I've got a very strong sense and instinct. It's not always good. But I can feel, yeah, we're on the right track, we're not on the right track. People say, how do you know? I say, I don't. It's just, yeah. So with this, and using a bit of logic as well, Burrow's alignments here, that does look to me like it's been planned. It's been mapped out and they've put those stones on that alignment. That's not chance. So at the moment, where are we now? 2025, August. At this point in time, I would tend to say Burrow's probably right, that there was a planned building of that monument. And it might have been multi-phased, but the main vision is one thing, rather than the traditional thing of a henge and then a burial chamber. I may be completely wrong, but I would err the other way. And also looking at that monument in the landscape, there's so much different stuff going on that ridge from different periods. There's a long tradition at that site, which I would totally accept. It's pretty good, though, that the way that lines up. That's not the odd line. I was there on not the solstice, but the weekend afterwards, doing the open day for Caddo. And we were inside the monument, and somebody came in and said to me, "It's definitely on a ley line." And I went, "What do you mean?" Not being nasty, but it's just, what do you mean by a ley line? Well, you know, energy. Okay. And then this person went, "It's Celtic, isn't it?" And I went, "It's not Celtic. Celtic tradition comes in about 500 BC. So immediately people are associating, it's like saying the golf course was built by the Romans. It's not. There's no point saying this was built by the Romans. You gain nothing. So I was trying to figure out, how do I deal with this? And I said, well, you know, it's definitely not Celtic. I don't want to disappoint you, but it's like saying the Vikings built the, I don't know, built the A55. It's just nonsense. It's not true. And the business about ley lines come from a book called The Old Straight Track, which is Alfred Watkins. It's a great book, but Watkins in the early 20th century sees lines between various monuments on the landscape. So it could be a well, it could be a Roman fort, it could be hole number 18 at Roslega Golf Club, and he lines them up on the map. And these things are known as ley lines. And people genuinely today believe in it. Now, there's no harm in it, for sure. But you're trying to put things together that have no cultural links. So again, as an archaeologist, I just go, I've got an archaeological term, which is, what a load of nonsense. You know, it really is. It's nonsensical. What have we got? So this is how Burrow interprets the sun coming in along the passageway. So it's a small window. So I wonder, is it part of the ritual that the dead are given a bit of daylight or sunlight once a year? Could that be what they were thinking? Now, what we call the pillar stone inside Bryn Celli is highly unusual. There's a freestanding stone in the burial chamber itself, which is non-structural, doesn't hold the roof up. I was last week, I was in Bryn Celli last week, and who turned up was the Rock Art Society. Dr. George Nash from Liverpool University and Evan Bain from West Ireland. They're the world experts on rock art. Absolute world experts. And there's 20 of them all together. It's quite interesting, because when I didn't know they were there, I just came out, and we went back in and discussed the patterns, the pillar stone. We all agreed it was non-structural. And I'm going to contradict myself here, because this year I was in Bryn Celli for a fortnight with school groups. Some of them had, you know, they needed a bit of extra support. And in order to get them engaged, I started it was a bit silly, but it did work, it was funny. I said, right, we're going to sniff the stones. Then what are we going to do? Listen to the stones. So what I was doing gently was getting them to use their senses and getting them engaged. And of course they were looking at me going, Rhys, what are you doing? It doesn't make a noise, it doesn't smell of anything. I said, good, so now you know. How about we touch it then? And then all of a sudden they're feeling the carvings. And I said, okay, take a step back, have a look. Where's the sun? What happens if we move with shadows? And you could have 8-year-olds becoming archaeologists. They were engaged with using their senses. So what I did with them is, let's hug the stone in the chamber. So I've lost my punk rock and my archaeological credibility. I'm hugging the stone. And it works, it's quite nice. And then one of the students said, because I was saying, what do you think this is? And there was a young lady, probably about 8 or 9. She said, it's a companion. I almost cried. I said, that's brilliant. That is, isn't it? It's a companion to your grandmother and your great aunt or whoever is buried in that chamber. That was from an 8-year-old. 8-year-old, not an 80-year-old. Yeah, straight out. With innocence, without preconceptions, without, iach, we'd say in Welsh, isn't it? It's good. Sometimes back to what I said about the police stitching people up, preconceptions, or archaeologists trying to prove something. Not always the right path. Youngsters with no agenda, pure, and they just go. I loved that. When she said companion, I'd never thought that. I was getting there by hugging, but, I hadn't figured it out. I said, you've made my day. So I'm just going to see what else is left. That's the inner stone. To the best of my knowledge, folks, and it is to the best of my knowledge, I don't actually know if there's something in Spain or Denmark or something, but to the best of my knowledge, that's the only freestanding stone in a burial chamber that I know of. This is the point where Nash and Even from Ireland. Have you seen anything like this before? And they couldn't think of anything either. So once again at Bryn Celli Ddu, we've got something that's potentially very unique. Very unique. But why? It's non-structural. It has been replaced by an archaeologist called W.J. Hemp in 2829. But, and we assume that Hemp put it back in the same place, to the same height. But there's a big question, isn't it? Why that stone? What that's doing? Aubrey Burl called it the protectress. Not far off from a companion. Not me. Archaeologists will always have something to do with phallus. Mostly men, isn't it? Mostly men. I'm just going to zoom, because I'm going to conclude. With archaeologists, when they don't know, they go, oh, it's ritual. And then anything that's pointy, they go, it's a phallic symbol. And you just think, once again, come on, let's reason these things out, stop imposing. So the magic with Bryn Celli Ddu, to conclude, is if you go there around that time, 21st of June, at around 3:30, 4 a.m., you get there before the dawn breaks. So the photograph that you're seeing now is taken from behind the western side of the monument, and the little pink bit is the sun beginning to come up. And I was there with the National Museum of Wales. And interesting, because we were giggling, just being in that burial chamber at 4 a.m. in the dark. It is like being boys, unfortunately, again. It was quite exciting and funny and thrilling, all those things. But we wait for the sun to rise. And I'm not going to say anything here because it speaks for itself. So this is what happens. So in life, I guess, there are certain things in life that stick with you when you go, wow, that was an experience. And that certainly was. When I saw that, I just went, that is something I've not experienced. The other one, I'll be honest with you, was one of Wales's best known naturalists, botanists, kindly took me up to see the Snowdon lily. Not being disclosed at all, obviously. And he led me up. It was on a cliff. Little bit scary, not too bad. And then he literally led me to the cliff and said, find it yourself. I did cry. I actually cried. I went, it's just magical. Magical. And this was a similar experience where you just think, wow, that's, we see a lot of good things, but these things are up there. So you go now, my advice is always don't go on the 21st of June because the Anglesey Druid Order are there and they're hilarious and it's really good. Chris Hughes is exceptionally entertaining and he's a dear friend, so don't worry about anything I say tonight. But it's entertainment, it's a spectacle. It's really good because it brings people in. It's given that monument new life. Chris knows what I think. He knows exactly what my view is on the Celtic connection. And I think he accepts that what he's created is an event. Nothing wrong with it. My advice is go the day before, you get the site to yourself. Or the day afterwards. Because the effect lasts for a week. When we filmed this was 5 days before, I think. Because we were up there deliberately early so that we wouldn't have people for the filming. I have no idea of time. I had a conversation earlier today about time with somebody. Sometimes you just need to not be too concerned with time. I think we're going to be eating now, so I'm probably going to be in the bad books. I'll have a cold vegetarian sandwich.
Well, thank you very much for confirming what I always knew, was that the Irish have been influencing the Welsh for thousands of years.
Goes without saying, folks.
We've got plenty of time for questions and chat before dinner, so who'd like to get the ball rolling with a question for Rhys? Right, yourself.
Can I ask, because I've got the microphone?
Of course you can.
So, Rhys, I thought that was a fantastic presentation. Thank you very much indeed. Brynchethley D. It was put there to bury the important people, maybe.
Yep.
But where did the people live? Is there any evidence of a settlement?
Now I'm going to say that's a good question. But I can answer it. That is, let's say that's an excellent question. Now then, in the Neolithic, which is the early farmers, they actually lived communally in wooden buildings. Now then, the chances of finding post holes in a rectangular shape in the fields around Brynchethley are 0.0. We're highly unlikely to find them. But where we have found them, brilliantly, my colleague Matt Jones and Cat Rhys at Llanfaethley, when they were building the new school, Matt and Catherine found 3, if not 4, Neolithic buildings. They're underneath the school. So what they actually found were post holes, but within the post holes and within context, they were finding Neolithic pottery and flint implements. So they know that those holes belong to that period because they've got Neolithic pottery in them. So when they cleared the site for the school at Llanfaethley, quite substantial, it's quite a sizable school, they've cleared enough area, they had no prior knowledge, and they found these Neolithic houses. Bingo. Where else have we found them? Parc Cubby. The industrial estate that doesn't really exist in Holyhead, isn't it? It's the abandoned, it was meant to be the Celtic link with Ireland, wasn't it? What was it called? The Celtic, not wave,
Tiger.
Tiger, the Celtic tiger. So this big industrial estate is built. Nothing really happens with it. But once again, on Parc Cubby, they found the outline of a Neolithic house. This is Jane Kenny, the archaeologist. She also finds that the house is aligned with one phase of Trefignath burial chamber. So the house and the burial chamber are lined up. So back to, back to your question. This is the thing that we discuss when we have open days at Brynchethley. It's a communal burial chamber, excuse me, for the early farmers. We don't know. That was my terrible joke. I don't know whether I get in or not. I always suspect not. But maybe it's all of us as the community that gets in. And then you don't because you live in Aberdaron or something. I don't know. So there's obviously some tickets to get in. So when you stand at Bryn Celli Ddu, which is a burial site for the early farmers, and you've just asked where do they live, I always answer, around here. They must have lived around here. They would have farmed those lands. Now, if Bryn Celli Ddu is situated on a little ridge surrounded by water, the chances are they're on the south-facing slopes just below or where Llandaniel is now, because they're growing crops south-facing. So they're probably around. It's a very good question where they live because you rarely find post holes. There's no wood left. It's a good question what that ticket was to get in, isn't it? So I think we're probably wrong to suggest that it was the elite because you find all sexes and infants in these burial chambers. It's not just men. Unless, you know, I don't know, they're individual families. Bad Clodiad has 4 different chambers in it, and with segregation, so that looks a bit like families going into one bit of the tomb. So that was an excellent question, good question about how they got in, excellent question about where they lived, which we can sort of answer. Good, okay.
Good. Just wait for the microphone, please.
Testing, testing, come in.
Good man.
Is there a source of flint on Anglesey?
No. So this is another interesting one. Well, I say no. What we occasionally find in North Wales is what we call Irish sea till. So they're pebbles that have been moved by glaciation. And it's possible to get small tools out of those things. You find them on Llŷn. There's a place called Trevor on the Llŷn Peninsula, and there's a site there where there's just thousands and thousands of bits of flint. It's on the coastal path. People don't realise what they're walking over. And they're little flint blades, or they're the flakes from making little blades. And it's usually things like Irish sea till. So the source of flint will be places like Norfolk, Grimes Graves. So once again, there's no flint on Anglesey. It's limestone and whatever else, you know, the schist stone. So we're having to move stuff around. We're having to trade. We're having to connect. Interestingly, on that subject, there's no suitable rock on Anglesey for making stone tools. So where do you get your axes from if you're living here in the Neolithic? It's Graig Lwyd by Penmaen Mawr, what they call the axe factories up there. So if you're farming in Rhosneigr, 3100 BC at the time of Bryn Celli Ddu, your axe will have come from the mainland near Penmaen Mawr. Question then is, do you go once a year with your little sack and go and pick some suitable rhyolite stone up? Or is there a dealer in Penmaen Mawr, comes around Anglesey, I've got a few axes. You know, how did that work? That's a good question, because we don't know. The source of rock in Penmaen Mawr, we call it Graig Lwyd, and then people would say axe factory. And the work that we've done there recently is axe factories, and it's every other outcrop that's suitable. So this stuff is everywhere. It's a form of rhyolite. And interestingly, last year, I was taking a group to see this site, and we crossed a field near Llanfairfechan, and there were flakes everywhere from making axes in a field. And I picked about 3 of them up, and I said, do you know what these are? And they couldn't believe it. I said, well, these are all the bits that they've been smashing off to create their axes. And that was just a random field. I'm going to say half a mile away from the rock outcrop. And I could see them everywhere. Good question. Yeah.
We got another question. Oh, here, Roger.
Probably not a good question, this, but I'll give it a go. The non-structural stone in the burial chamber, could that have had another bit on top of it and therefore become structural? That it's got a lot of time to fall off and be
It
taken
has.
away.
We quite
hasn't
like
it?
this.
Is that a good question?
Now, that's an excellent,
Oh, here we go.
you know,
Bingo.
what's the word? No, it's an excellent one to throw in the pot, for sure. The way it works often is when we have our tea breaks, when we're on excavations, we have a tea break. And you say that, and you go, oh, right, has it lost the top? So it's a valid question, isn't it? And then you try to see, is it broken or is it how it was? Now, unfortunately, in Bryn Celli V, what they've used is the bedrock, which is blue schist. They've probably used it for a reason, because if you knock it, it sparkles with a mic in it, and it's got a blue tint. So they've probably selected it because it's got a, you know, spiritual quality visually. The pillar stone in Bryn Celli V is blue schist. It's the same stone, but it's formed as a pillar. So one of the questions there is, was it in any, pardon the pun, shape or form shaped by humans? And I've not got the answer. And we need to find, you know, an expert in stone marks or something to say, no, it's natural. It is as it is. They've just selected it because it looked like a column. Right, just the reason I say it's a good question is it's inside the chamber. So it's unlikely to be structural because the structure is formed by the walls of the chamber. So I can't see, I'm not disagreeing with you now at all, but if we were discussing this, I would go, can't see it being structural because the walls are the structure. So this is, it's like having a column inside your living room. That's not holding the roof up, it's doing something else.
Like an egg.
Yeah. That would be my take on it. So that stone has been put in deliberately for some other reason.
Thank you.
Anne, you're Mark.
Going back, two things. Going back to your Penmaenmawr flints, between Penmaenmawr, is that better? Between Penmaenmawr and Llanfyddechan, excuse the pronunciation, there are several standing circles, stone circles.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Yeah, quite a few there. These on the island here, is the stone they're made from local?
Yes. Okay. Once again, this is excellent, okay, for several reasons. So generally speaking, these monuments are built with local stone. Now what that actually means in practice is they're not dragging stones 20 miles. They're not bringing stone from Penmaenmawr to Anglesey to build the monument. They're trading axes. So when you go to Penrhos Feilw, near Holyhead, it's Holyhead schist from a rock outcrop 2 fields away. When you go to Bryn Celli V, there's a huge outcrop in the field to the north, which is where the stones probably come from. And it's blue schist. When you go to Barclodiad down the road here, a lot of that stuff is probably from the cliff edge. But within Barclodiad, they've also got smooth stones that have been worn by water. So some of them must have come off the beach, I guess. They must have been in the sea or a stream. So what we would then suggest is if all of us were building a monument together, my friend here is going to say, I need something looking a bit Irish in my corner, and he's probably going to go to the beach here and select something that reminds him of home.
Oh.
And you're going to go, well, I'm from Llanrfechan, and I need a spiky one. And I think people probably did select. There's also an interesting thing that I haven't even mentioned tonight. Bryn Gwyn, which is between Bryn Shenkin and Dwyran. There are 2 standing stones in the field there, north side of the road. And there's one trapezoid, stumpy one, and one tall, so let's say spiky one, but you get this pattern. And we know from recent excavations that George Smith did in 2010 that they were part of a stone circle. He's found the sockets underground for the other stones. In that instance, it was the farmers in the 19th century that whacked them down, unfortunately, because the stumps were still there for some of the stones. So they've cleared the only stone circle that we had on Anglesey. But it's all local. So that's the first part. It's the material for axes that is moved. Long distance. Now then, you mentioned Llanrfechan, Penmaen Mawr, that area. It's full of stone circles and cairns and all sorts of standing stones and arrangements, almost impossible to interpret. You trip over archaeological monuments on those hills. Cefn Coch. The question there is, do those monuments which are Bronze Age, and they are Bronze Age, so they're going to be slightly later than the axe factories, but does that reflect some kind of spirituality as that being a special sacred mountain because people had their axes from there? It's also the route of the prehistoric tracks. Because if you think about Penmaen Bach and the tunnels, 1934, you couldn't walk along the headlands unless tide was out. So the old paths come through Bwlch-y-Ddeufaen. They come from the Conwy Valley, over the top where the pylons are, and they come down in Aber, what we call Aber Gwyn Gregyn. So that hilltop is both riddled with archaeological monuments, mainly Bronze Age stones, and all these ancient trackways, which the Romans also used the same route. It's an incredible place.
It is.
Incredible place. And it's tempting to think that let's say the sacred mountain has got something to do with the source of your axes, which provide you with the means of clearing the fields of trees to build your houses and grow your crops. So it is important, isn't it? It is important. Excellent, again.
Can we have another excellent question?
I can ask another one.
But is it excellent?
It's well.
The
it
standard
won't
of
be.
questions, folks, is extremely high.
So I'm very interested in cup marks because I looked at a lot in Argyll, and the cup marks in the valley there have got cup marks, but they've got sort of engravings around the outside, like looks like an atom.
Yes, less so in Wales.
Do you get any of those?
We do. But if you go up to, Scotland, Northumberland and these places, you have what they call cup and ring marks. And you might have several rings. Generally speaking in Wales, this is really generally, we have individual cup marks or a group of cup marks. But there's one panel, one outcrop by Llanfaniol, where they've been interlinked with grooves. Interesting. There's one cup mark, debatable, undebated, on the capstone at Barclodiad y Gawres. So last week, when George Nash and Evan Bain and all those experts turned up, we were in Bryn Celli Ddu. End of my shift. I'd done a long day. I was thinking, cup of tea time, Rhys. And they go, any chance we could go to Barclodiad? And they were eminent. They were the world experts. And how could I not say, go on in. I'll take you up. But when I showed them the cup mark on the capstone, 50-50. No, it's not. It might be. Yes, it is. No, it's not. And they were arguing with each other. And because they were world experts, I just said, well, look, this is what we've got. What do you think? It's interesting to be amongst the experts, but able to, I said, well, it looks like one to me. It's flaked. The capstone in Bad Clodiad is actually chipped. So it's the bottom of the cup mark, it's not the full thing. I think their feeling was no, to be honest with you. But I worked on the project in Bryn Celli V for about 3 months. When you went home, you dreamt about cup marks.
Mm-hmm.
Never again. So, I would put the Bad Clodiad one in the definitely maybe category. Give it a chance.
Andy.
Yeah. I mean, I'd just say that, like, from what I understand, it's also you've got them in like the Scottish Isles, and then I think you've got some like down the coast of England, and then you've also got some in France and Iberia. So it's almost like it would be a really notable absence if like this Neolithic culture right here, which is clearly like in communication and using so much of the same kind of material culture otherwise, isn't doing cup marks. But that relates to the other thing that I was kind of wondering, which is like, if I understood correctly, we've got like this kind of timeline of like 3 different cultures, where we've got the Neolithic ones doing the burial chambers, and then you've got the Bronze Age sort of Stonehenge standing stone stuff, and then at some point later you've got the Celts.
Yeah.
At what point does Anglesey become that kind of like centre of power that it's supposed to be with the Celts?
Okay, good. Well done. That's, again, I would say that's astute, this one. The cup marks bridge the Neolithic and the Bronze Age, which is interesting because they're bridging 2 different cultural events, if you like. So a question that's often asked is where the cup marks added at a later date. They might have been in places. But I was on a site close to where you mentioned on Sunday, a place called Mine y Barf in Rowen. And George Nash has just discovered 5 cup marks on an outcrop. And I was leading a walk on Sunday. Was it? No, Monday. Julie and Lorna are going to laugh now. So what I did, I went up. I was leading the walk on the Monday. So I went up on the Sunday myself. Where are these cup marks? And I did actually find them, but I was so nervous that I wasn't convinced. So that evening, I phoned Nash up and I said, I think I've seen them. Confirm. He did confirm that I had seen them, but they were so faint. And then even got in touch then on WhatsApp or whatever it was, saying you need to go in the dark with a torch and they'll show up. But this is the point to your question. The cup marks are on bedrock next to a burial chamber. So it's the distance from me to you. But the cup marks, according to George Nash, face the monument. So they're intervisible. So Nash would argue, again, they're related in some way. It's mind-blowing. So back to your point, which again is very good. With Anglesey, I think the key is it's the good agricultural land. If you go up to Blaenau Ffestiniog, you are not going to be growing corn and wheat and barley in the same scale as you're going to be doing in Llanarch y Medd. That's the reality. So this is, as we say, Morn Mam Cymru, this is the breadbasket of Wales. So there's going to be a concentration of agricultural activity here because there's better land. That's just the way it is. Anglesey's an island, so you're not walking across the Menai Strait at the time of these monuments. So it's already an island. So Bar Clodiad y Gawres here is on the coast when it was built, looking towards Ireland. It's not on a beach that's, the sea is 5 miles to the west or something. It's where it is. So we're already an island. So they have to cross in boats. As I always say to people when they ask this question, they're not walking across, otherwise they're going to be wet feet. Understatement, isn't it? Very wet feet. So when you mention the Celts, this tradition comes in at the end of the Iron Age, somewhere around 500 BC, and it's based on art forms and cultural objects from Le Thènes and Hallstatt. So it's France and Switzerland, those areas, Central European. And there's a good question how much of it is cultural. We like the new images. It's a bit like having Portmeirion pottery, isn't it? We like the new pottery. And how much movement of people there might have been. There's always movement of people, but it doesn't mean, you know, that the Celts en masse came here and occupied us. We've definitely got sites in North Wales that bridge the whole period, and it's the same people. So it hasn't been a mass invasion or change. We've excavated a site called Meillionnydd on Llyn, which dates between about 800 BC and 200 BC. So that's from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age, including whatever we'd call the Celtic. And it's all the same place. So there's no big change there. It's just continuity, but there's a new form of art. Or there's a new form of body paints, whatever it is. But they're still farming in the same place. The only thing I would stress is you cannot connect the Celts to Bryn Celli Ddu as a burial chamber, or the standing stones at Llanfaethlu.
Have we any more questions?
You have done well. Good, well
We
done.
have a question way down in the back corner there.
Can I just, while we're waiting for the question, if I could just say one thing. Thank you very much for your patience. You've sat there for quite a while. Well done.
Well done to you. Well done to you.
Hello. Thank you very much for that. I was just going to ask about some literatures. I mean, lots of people who buy into the narrative of Bryn Celli Ddu and the Druids, etc., like to start wailing on people like Tacitus, for example, and his description of Suetonius Paulinus storming Anglesey and the rest of it, which is rendered on a recording in Oriel Môn, actually, as you'll well know, in an accent which sounds like the guys from Llanachamedd playing Roman Tacitus. And I was going to ask, because it strikes me, these literatures were immensely influential, and you alluded to the whole debate about the invention of tradition with Eric Hobsbawm and all the rest of it, which happened in lots of countries parallel to Wales, such as Scotland, for example, and Ireland. And I remember I worked with Richard Wyn-Jones for a while, and you know him, and he put up a photocopy of a book from 1913 called Queen Boudica, Her Life, Battles and Death Near Rhyl, which was written by someone called Pontypridd Murian in 1913. And I was
okay.
And I would just like you to comment on the massive influence that these such popular histories had over time, and say something about the Roman history of Anglesey.
Okay. Da iawn.
Iawn?
Again, excellent. Seriously, I'm not saying it. I do not say things just... I tell bad jokes, but I don't say things just to say bonny, as we say in Welsh. Very good. So, let me retrace my steps now. On the Tacitus front, Tacitus was a Roman historian writing about the attack against the Druids on Anglesey. So there's a few key things with this, really important. Tacitus is writing from a Roman viewpoint. So with history, there's three questions. Who's writing? Usually men. Why? And when? So how close is it to the actual fact? I am going to chance my terrible joke when I do the Sigontium tours in Caernarfon, the Roman forts. It overlooks Ynys Môn. So when we do Tacitus in Sigontium, I always ask, is there anybody here from Ynys Môn? And if there is, I don't tell the joke. Would you like to hear the joke? You've probably guessed it, because the gentleman alluded to Llanach y Medd. I read Tacitus out with a serious face. I'm not really an actor, but I ham it up. And then I stop, and I look at them, and I say, Tacitus was obviously describing Llanach y Medd or Llangefni on a Saturday night. Because he describes the warriors naked, covered in blue paint. The ladies screaming, getting the men ready for battle, and the druids there being the spiritual advisors. Does it pass as a reasonable joke, or am I sacked?
Well, you've only got 10 minutes left.
Okay,
anyway.
so I'll skip the tea and go home quickly. So with the Romans, on a serious note, they attack Anglesey in 6061. Suetonius Paulinus, and it's to get rid of the Druid resistance. That's a fact. Boudica then kicks off in Essex, modern-day Essex, and the Romans have to go back to deal with Boudica, or Bivig as we call it in Welsh. So there's a weird period in history between around 61 and 77 where the Romans are not here. The Druids have either been killed, or my theory is they took their robes off and hid in Llanach y Medd. They just went, let's blend, lads, pretend we're not a Druid. And maybe survived. We've got a strange period where we don't really know what happens. Now then, in North Wales, the main Roman fort is Sigontium in Carnarvon. That was the administrative centre. But we have two possible campaign forts, and they're debatable, but they're possible. One is Cemlyn, near Wilfa, and the other is Abersoch on Llyn. And if we thought that the Romans had arrived in Carnarvon, and they go, right, you're going all the way across Anglesey and hit the north coast, you end up in Cemlyn, reconnaissance, build your little fortlet, there's nothing here, back to Sigontium. And they do the same in Llyn, in Abersoch. So we might have two campaign forts, which they also have in Pembrokeshire, similar shape, and they also have them in Devon, these weird little sub-rectangular campaign forts. So that's the question, the first question. Did the Romans just belt it through Anglesey, see what's happening, and apart from Mynydd Paris and the food, not a lot. So they retreat to Carnarvon because at Tai Cochion, which is near the Sea Zoo, Brynllencyn, they have a settlement which was obviously a trading post between the farmers of Anglesey and the Romans in Carnarvon. Holyhead Roman fort is later, that's 3rd, 4th century, coastal defence, because you guys were attacking us, raiding from Ireland for a short period. When I do that with the Americans, I say we're brothers and sisters, really, but they did have a little phase in the late 200s, early 300s, when they were raiding for some reason. Interestingly, this is going to be controversial, we don't really know of any Roman roads on Anglesey. Whatever people say, David Hopewell is the expert on Roman roads. He hasn't got one crossing Anglesey. And you imagine building the A55, whenever that was, 20 years ago. You'd have thought that you'd have hit it somewhere, clipped it in some way. So we've never found the Roman road crossing Anglesey. So whether they just sailed around. So Tacitus is a source, historical source. With history, always be mindful who's writing and why. So when I do the Roman tours, I always say, well, it's Roman propaganda. That's what it would have been. So we're always going to be painted in woad, pardon the pun, badly, aren't we? It's going to be those Druids on Anglesey. Iawn? Thank you.
The only thing I would say about Tacitus, though, he did write anti-Roman stuff, but he usually put it in the mouth of someone else. And the famous quote is, they made a wasteland and they called it peace, which he ascribed to a mythological British chieftain. So he wasn't averse to criticising the Roman Empire, actually.
Yeah.
Which was quite rare, I admit, amongst Roman
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point, because coming back to the sort of message, you've always got to be analytical. So who is writing and why? So maybe, yeah, he's got a little subtext of criticism as well. Maybe good on him. You know, it's one of those questions, isn't it? You've always got to go back, who's writing, when and why. How long after the fact is another big question, isn't it? Do they actually, is it second, third hand?
So before we, oh, sorry. Come here to John. Yeah.
Thank you. Brilliant evening. Really a comment about transportation. I mean, in those days, transportation across land was almost impossible. Heavily wooded all across the country, so the easiest way was always by sea. And I lived in Grimsby for a while, and
Were you there last night?
boy, what happened? Oh, yeah, and they have incredibly strong Danish connections, because Denmark was the closest place to be. It was quicker to get to Denmark than it was to get to London, right until the 1850s, 1860s, when the railways came. So there was still major travel across to the continent that way. And that was when there were roads, good roads around Britain, or relatively good roads. So I can only imagine that the Romans would have probably gone round to Kemlin, round the coast, rather than fight their way across uncharted territory.
Yeah. I mean, that's, again, a very, very good point. You imagine, if we go back to things like these axes that they're sourcing in Penman Mawr, and they need them on the north coast of Anglesey, question only, because we've never found ships, we've never found deposits on a beach, you know, a big pile of stone axes that got lost. But it's certainly a possibility, isn't it, that they just went up to Moelvre and came in there somewhere, or, you know, Trethicwy or something. We don't know. The only way you could prove things like that was, let's say you have a supply of axes and you find them dumped on a beach. So the sack has gone, and you could say, oh, maybe they've lost these things, they were just left on a beach and they were never distributed or collected or something. Your point is correct. Boats would have been an obvious way. Yeah.
So, as we come to our close, I'm going to take the opportunity to ask a question that's been bothering me for some time, now that we've come to AD from BC. Many times I've been up to the little church at Llinpodrig, near Camace, and Julie assures me that St. Patrick was wrecked on a shipwreck off the shores of the north of Anglesey, and he was rescued by the Welsh. And I just want to know if that's true or not.
You know what? There's another saying, never spoil a good story.
Ladies and gentlemen, can you put your hands together for Rhys? And Rhys has, you have two books with you tonight, one in Welsh and one in English. This is the English one. I bought it today for more money than he's selling it for here tonight. So thank you very much for being a wonderful audience, and great questions, great discussion, and thank you so much again.
Pleasure. Na, da iawn chi.
Well done. That was excellent.